Hey, deserving listeners, this is chapter 6 in the attachment theory deep dive. This is the final chapter, and I thought I would start today's chapter getting down to earth a little bit. You know, mostly what I've been talking about in these deep dives, and by the way, I've already talked for 15 hours about attachment theory, so this episode will probably add another couple hours, and so this deep dive is going to be something like 17 hours of material. But anyway, most of the time I've been talking, it's mostly about theory and research and history and all that kind of stuff. But I want to bring it down to earth a little bit. So let's talk about real life here before we go to the patron zone. This email is from patron Alexis. She's a $20 patron of the podcast, a friend, and someone who came to the live show last time, so I got to meet her. She's a lovely person. I communicate with her frequently. She wants to better understand her attachment style. She wants to understand better so she can increase her coping skills and improve her relationships. She also finds comfort in knowing how to accurately conceptualize her attachment style and other people's attachment style. So she has some questions about herself and other people. And I thought that it would be, and she gave permission to read this non-anonymously on the podcast. So I just thought I'd read it, and then we can kind of check in. But I thought that her description was pretty good because it, again, brings us down to earth and really puts us into real life. She writes, I'm confused about my attachment style, and any insight you have would be appreciated. Relationships tend to be the primary focus of my life, especially romantic ones. I really want to get married and have a family. In relationships, I constantly worry about my partner leaving me. I tend to obsess about it, and when I fall in love, I fall hard. I've stayed in unhappy relationships past their expiration date for fear of being alone or hurting the other person. I obsess over issues I'm having with the other and wonder frequently if I'm too picky. So usually I accept the flaws of my partners and continue the relationship. I've kept relationships going with people who clearly didn't care for me. In most of my relationships, I have felt needy. My partners tend to be distant. I really desire a lot of physical affection and closeness. I am very concerned when my partner is away. I am hypervigilant of signs they might be leaving me. I go into classic testing tactics when I feel insecure, like making them jealous or lashing out at them. I am internally critical of both myself and my friends. Losing friends is devastating to me. I mostly put others' needs above my own. I rush into romantic relationships and hate being alone. However, I also, so she was saying that she seems preoccupied, but she goes on to say, however, I also have plenty of avoidant behaviors. At work, I don't socialize with my coworkers and prefer to eat lunch alone. I've always preferred living alone. I'm nice and friendly, but I really don't want to get close to roommates and coworkers. I'm avoidant with my family and extremely uncomfortable around their emotions. I'm truly in my own world. I've never been the one to initiate my friendships or romantic relationships. My friends often complain I don't ever initiate contact or plans. I hate conflict. It terrifies me. So I think I'm preoccupied, but it also seems like I'm avoidant. And I'm much more comfortable with being preoccupied and anxious, but when I think about my avoidant label, I'm less comfortable with that label. So any insight you have would be much appreciated. So if you listen to the previous chapters, so that's the end of the email. So if you've listened to the other chapters on attachment theory, you'll hear definite signs of preoccupied attachment or anxious attachment. So you know, it sounds to me, Alexis, like you definitely have all the classic signs of preoccupied attachment, but you're also saying, hey, you know, I have these other things that I think I'm also avoidant. Well, the thing is not everyone fits nicely into one of the 4 categories that we've talked about in previous chapters. You're talking about billions of people with a wide variety of different presentations and different experiences. And not only is it hard to categorize people into one of the 4 categories, but I like to think about it as being on a spectrum. There are, you know, some people are, say, 30% avoidant, 50% secure, and 20% preoccupied or something like that. And research has found that that's actually not a bad way to look at it. So not everyone fits nicely into the 4 categories, but you definitely sound preoccupied. And also, when I look at your avoidant, what you claim to be avoidant signs, they're not actually, in my mind, that avoidant. You know, if you were avoidant, you wouldn't have all those signs of preoccupation. Plus, to me, it doesn't sound like you're avoidant. That's the signs you give. The signs you give sound more like introversion or social anxiety. For example, you say that you don't like to socialize, you keep to yourself, that kind of stuff. Preoccupied people can absolutely be introverted, and preoccupied people can absolutely be socially anxious. So I would take a guess and say that you're definitely preoccupied, but also have some potential introversion and or social anxiety. If you were avoidant, you wouldn't actually have those very strong signs like, you like to bounce from relationship to relationship. You fall in love very hard. You tend to obsess about relationships. The other thing I'll say is that avoidant attachment style, insecure attachment is universal in that when you're insecurely attached, you are thirsty for attachment. And the way that you cope with it determines your quote-unquote attachment style. So the preoccupied people tend to lean in, and avoidant people tend to avoid attachments. But the avoidant person still deeply wants relationships. I mean, one way to think about it is that underneath the veil of avoidance for avoidant people lies a preoccupied attached person, meaning that if you kind of get past that avoidant layer, they definitely start to act preoccupied because they deeply want relationships with other people. I mean, I've seen super avoidant people when avoidant people, when they're in a relationship and things seem to be going okay, they tend to be very distant and that kind of thing. But when you actually get under their skin, they actually can exhibit preoccupation. Anyway, so that's just another thing to think about. So patron Alexis, then you go on to talk about other things here. You say, my current relationship hit a snag. My sense of security has stripped away. My sense of security was stripped away when my partner abruptly broke up with me and then immediately changed his mind and came back to me. He said as we were talking about the future, he had a moment of panic and decided to break up with me, and then realized he didn't really want to break up with me, so we got back together. Since then, I've been acting out classic preoccupied attachment patterns. Before that, though, since he is fairly secure, I was more calm and steady. So then she goes on to describe her partner. My partner is an interesting mix of attachment. He loves a lot of togetherness and affection. He loves being taken care of and being mothered, but he respects boundaries extremely well and doesn't ever seem to be hurt when I can't fulfill his needs. He doesn't devote much energy into our relationship. He insists he doesn't experience negative emotions. He even said maybe he's a psychopath, which is laughable because if you knew him, you would laugh at that. He hates kissing. He walks ahead of me in public. He devotes most of his energy to intellectual pursuits and work. And up until this hiccup when he broke up with me and then got back together with me, he always made me feel safe and secure in the relationship. So I assumed his attachment to be secure, but now I don't know. Yeah, so end of email. Now, I have to say, I can't diagnose you and I can't diagnose your boyfriend. Attachment styles aren't a diagnosis in the DSM anyway, but even I can't assess you. I can't provide a sure assessment, so to speak, of the situation over email, which I think is obvious. But having said that, according to what you're saying, he definitely has the signs of what I would call mostly avoidant with some secure attachment. Again, you can be on a spectrum. So let's say, 60% avoidant, 40% secure. That's not a scientific statement because we don't really have a way of measuring that sort of thing precisely. But anyway, so as you say, he seems to manage relationships pretty well. He makes you feel safe. He's pretty good with boundaries. He's pretty good with making bids for love and attention. So that is classic secure attachment. But he also has some classic avoidance signs. Like, for instance, he panicked at the prospect of committing to you and broke up. When you were talking about the future, he got scared and he broke up. Now, breaking up with someone isn't a sign of avoidant, but the fact that he instantly regretted it and went and came back to you and was and felt like regret for breaking up with you so impulsively is a classic avoidant thing. Avoidant people will do that. They get scared and challenged, and their coping style when they're in that state of distress is to run away, to break up, to isolate, to depend on the self, to return to the baseline of I'm okay, I'm independent, I don't need other people, and screw all this stuff. But the problem is the avoidant attachment style, coping style, behavior style is not actually helpful to the individual because it denies them attachment to others. And often they will realize that. So again, he's not that avoidant, because if he was really avoidant, he would have stayed gone and regretted it, but not came back. So that's a sign of some level of avoidance. Also, another classic thing about avoidant people is that they will claim that they don't experience emotions, which is what your boyfriend claims. Avoidant people will say, I'm fairly intellectual, I don't experience emotions. And the reality is that, of course, they experience emotions because they're humans, they're not robots, but they don't notice them because they cut themselves off from their emotions when they were young as a way of coping with the fact that they're being neglected. So that's a classic sign. And I hear a lot of this from men who are avoidant attachment style. They'll be like, I feel like I don't have emotions, and I feel like I don't have empathy, and I feel like I don't really need other people. And certainly there are some people like that, but usually the case is they are avoidant attachment style to a significant degree, and they have emotions, but they don't notice them. And all you got to do is dig just a little further into their life to realize that they actually know they have emotions, but it's usually in a very severe way. They will have like really severe emotions during particular episodes when their defenses can't hold it back anymore. The third thing that is a classic avoidant sign is that he devotes a lot of his energy to intellectual pursuits and his work, as opposed to relationships, right? A lot of avoidant people will do that. We all need something to pour our energy into. We all need a source of self-esteem. And what avoidant people realized when they were very young, even at the age of like 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, they realized that in relationships, they couldn't gain any self-esteem because their relational environment was such that they felt neglected and alone or abused or something there was something bad about their caregiving and their parents that made them turn away from them. And what they realized as they grew up is that they could get a lot of gratification by dedicating themselves to school and sports and creativity and that kind of thing. Plus, as another benefit to that is they tend to get a lot of love and attention by succeeding. When you're really good in school, your parents will occasionally give you love and attention. And so it's a strategy sometimes to gain love and attention, to dedicate yourself to those things, because you actually don't trust that if you go straight for the attachment, you're going to get it. And the fourth classic sign of avoidant attachment that he exhibits, it's not a classic sign, but he walks ahead of you in public. I find this to be a very interesting observation by you, patron Alexis, that he walks ahead of you in public. And it is kind of weird, right? It's like you're walking in the mall and they walk ahead of you. It's like, why are you doing that? It's so annoying. I've been with people that have done that before, and I find it to be incredibly annoying. Or they walk just behind you. There's a certain skill that apparently most of us develop where we learn how to walk almost subconsciously, gauge our speed based on the person we're walking with, right? And so he walks ahead of you. Now, it's hard to say exactly why this is. It's possible that he's just a really fast walker, or maybe, Alexis, you're just a really slow walker. I don't know. But it's also possible that because he had to turn off his emotions when he was a young person, it makes it harder for him to notice his own empathy and to notice his own emotions and to pay attention to other people. So he has a certain attention to his emotions and other people, but he learned a long time ago to not pay attention to that. And so as he's walking, he's just sort of self-focused, and he's walking at his own pace, and he's not modifying his pace for you, not as a way of being a dick, but because he doesn't notice. And before long, he's a couple feet ahead of you or something. And so now if I had the luxury of actually talking to him, maybe he'll say something like, well, Alexis walks really slow and it drives me crazy, so I like to walk fast because I want her to catch up to me. Or I'm a very impatient person and I hate, I just got to get to my destination. Or, he might say like, what are you talking about? I never walk ahead of her. That's crazy. Alexis is a crazy person. Like, it's just hard to know like what I would find if I actually worked with you two people. But anyway, so yeah, he has, like you said, some signs of secure and some signs of avoidant. So he sounds like he's some mixture of that. And, and a lot of times for preoccupied people, such as yourself, they will find that they're attracted to avoidant people because there's this inherent distance that's upheld in the pursuer distancer. The avoidant person is often looking for a preoccupied person because the avoidant person needs love and attention, but the avoidant person doesn't ask for love and attention. Deep down they want it, but they have a hard time asking for it. So sometimes they'll fit well with a preoccupied person because the preoccupied person doesn't wait for the person to ask for it. The preoccupied person just invades and sort of forces love on the avoidant person, which of course the avoidant person is desperate for. And the preoccupied person is looking, and the preoccupied person, what they're looking for is someone who is stable, someone who is quote unquote strong, someone who is not reactive. And avoidant people tend to not be very reactive. And so, because if a preoccupied person is with someone who is reactive, like they get angry or they get jealous a lot, or they get, sad a lot or hurt, their feelings get hurt very easily, then the preoccupied person becomes extremely anxious because the preoccupied person, when they're with someone who has a lot of emotions, they tend to obsess on that and worry about the other person because bad emotions means that their partner might leave them. And so, and then the preoccupied person might even punish their partner for having emotions, or they might even sort of try to get the other person to not have any emotions, try to control their emotionality. Whereas an avoidant person, they look extremely stable and safe to a preoccupied person. The problem is the avoidant person is not necessarily safe, as what Alexis realized here, is that he seemed very stable and very kind and very level-headed, but when you started talking about the future, he suddenly broke up with you, and then he suddenly came back. So it's possible, and so it's also possible, and I hate to say this, Alexis, but it's also possible that your partner, because he's avoidant, he has things rattling around in his head that he's not telling you. There are people who are either really afraid to reveal what's in their mind, whether it be something small like I don't like the way you walk so slow, or something big like I'm not sure about our future. And so there's all that kind of stuff. Again, I have no idea what your relationship is like. I know you kind of well. I feel like you're a lovely individual, and I feel like I can trust your statements about yourself. But anyway, so I thought it would be good to read your email here at the beginning of this chapter, because I wanted to kind of bring this back to earth. If you are listening to this and you haven't heard the other chapters, and some of this isn't making a lot of sense, you have to listen to the other chapters. You have to listen to the previous 14 hours of attachment style deep dive or attachment theory deep dive, because I'm guessing this whole discussion here will make a lot more sense. But I hope some of it actually resonated with you. Okay, so let's get into this chapter here. In this chapter, this is the grab bag chapter of all the things that I haven't talked about yet. I'm going to talk about parenting. I'm going to talk about parenting styles and attachment. I'm going to talk about how attachment style of the parent influences the way the parent parents. I'm going to talk about social competence, adoption, and how that affects attachment. I'm going to talk about how parents will use technology like TV and their cell phones and how that affects attachment. I'm going to talk about so-called attachment parenting, which for some of you might have heard in the news, attachment parenting. I'm going to talk about the birthing process. The birthing process has something to do with attachment. I'm going to talk about sibling jealousy, sibling rivalry. I'm going to talk about the brain and the biology of the brain and attachment. I'm going to talk about attachment style and memory. That's very fascinating when you look in how memory is different. The process of memory in the brain is different for secure, avoidant, and preoccupied people. I'm going to talk about opioids in memory, meaning our endogenous opioids. We're going to talk about oxytocin in memory, cortisol, inflammation, mirror neurons. I'm going to talk about perfectionism and how that applies to attachment style and attachment experiences, adaptive perfectionism and maladaptive perfectionism. We're going to talk about the big 5 personality traits and how it relates to attachment style. I'm going to go into personality disorders a little bit. I'm going to do a fair amount of talking on a reactive attachment disorder and disinhibited social engagement disorder. I'm going to talk about the proposed disorder for the DSM-5 called developmental trauma disorder, which I really like, the designation. Crime, grief, alexithymia, addiction, depression, social anxiety. We're going to talk about social anxiety for a while. A little bit on eating disorders, death anxiety, anger problems, and psychopathy. How does attachment and relate to the development of a lack of empathy, the development of a psychopath, the development of antisocial personality. I'm going to talk about how do you measure attachment, the various different measures that have been scientifically developed over the last 30 years and how they work. And we're going to talk about dandelion children and orchid children. I'm going to talk about public policy and public health in relation to attachment disorder, Donald Trump and how that's related to our attachment. Talk about social media and Facebook and pets. We're going to talk a while about pets because that's very important for our attachment. I'm going to talk about emotional regulation and let's see what else is on my health and so on. We're going to talk. So this is, like I said, this is a grab bag episode. So if you're not a patron of the podcast, do so now. You have to become a patron to listen to this episode and the other 14 hours of a deep dive on attachment disorder by going to patreon.com. That's patreon.com. Become a patron of the podcast. You'll get instructions on how to access this episode and the hundreds of other patron exclusive episodes. When you become a patron of the podcast, you just, get the warm feeling that, you're supporting something that you like. The only reason why I can do these deep dives is because you guys are patrons. If I wasn't getting paid to do this gig, there's no possible way I could dedicate so much time. To this deep dive, to talk for 17 hours about something that's 17 hours right there. But I prep for the episodes for months. I've been prepping for this specific, set of episodes for 4 or 5 months, which means that every time I had free time, like I would have, Saturday and Sunday, I have nothing to do. All I'm going to do 16 hours a day is work on this deep dive. And that's what I've been doing. And the only way I could do that is because you guys are patrons, which is super cool of you. So if you're not yet a patron, go to patreon.com, become a patron. Do so now.